This is Chris Collinsworth. Be sure to check out the PFF College podcast as our experts provide insight on all the league's top stories. Every game, every player, every play. Download and subscribe on iTunes or your favorite provider.
Hello and welcome to the Pro Football Focus Preview Podcast. Week 17 is the last week of the regular season. Sam Monson, Mike Renner, David Tuckman here for what appears to be on the surface a fairly meaningless week. What a nightmare week for the NFL. I mean, from a business standpoint, to lose two starting quarterbacks and two of the younger, more exciting quarterbacks in the league, Derek Carr, Marcus Mariota, just a couple of weeks after losing Ryan Tannehill. Man, it's almost as if the league is conspiring to get the Patriots back in the Super Bowl. Mike, I mean, how disappointing for the NFL and for Oakland fans.
Oh, it's got to be awful for the NFL, considering we could have some AFC wildcard matchups featuring, multiple backup quarterbacks, which would just be, no one wants to see that, I feel like, at this point. And it's really going to be meaningless considering it's probably going to go through New England in the AFC.
I think you're underselling the potential of a Matt Moore versus Matt McGloin shootout.
I definitely am.
No?
And you know what? I apologize to the McGloin parents. I say that thinking McGloin's parents are alive and well. I have no idea. My apologies if they are not. Merry Christmas to everybody, of course. Happy New Year. Right around the corner, 2017. This is our last podcast of 2016. Just when you thought 2016 couldn't get any worse. This podcast is over.
I want to say something about 2016 jokes. They're not funny. They were never funny. 2016 being a bad year. We get it. They're all the same joke. Just, all right. Had to say it. Keep going.
Wow, look at you, Scrooge. Man, I tell you, Mike Renner is like 85-year-old, old, crotchety old man that's stuck in a 27-year-old man's body.
I'm only 26, by the way, but I do have a lot of hate in my heart.
Yeah, you know what then? You don't look, I was going to say you look really good for 24, but for 26, I don't know, man. Anyway, so we're going to do something a little bit different since there's only one really meaningful game this week, which is Detroit-Green Bay, and that game actually could be somewhat meaningless if the Redskins lose to the New York Giants. We will cover that game. That will be kind of our game of the week, and we'll go through that. But instead of going from game to game to game, because for most of you, your fantasy football seasons are over. Congratulations if you won. My condolences if you lost. But and since the rest of the games are fairly meaningless, we are going to take a look at the playoff teams. And very simply, I'm going to ask the analysts one reason why a team might succeed and go far in the playoffs, and one reason why they might not. Okay? Before we get into that, though, let's get into Detroit-Green Bay, which is the Sunday night game. So this is interesting because obviously NBC hoping that Washington wins, so this game has a lot of meaning. They are playing for the division no matter what, but if Washington loses, they're both in. If they tie, they're both in. We have that as well. Mike, talk about Green Bay's offense versus Detroit's defense.
Yeah, I sat in front of this mic 6 weeks ago or whatever and said, when Aaron Rodgers said we're going to run the table, or we think we can run the table, and said, that's probably not going to happen. And I'm sitting here in front of the same mic saying I'm probably going to be wrong about that because he has been a completely. I kept saying at the beginning of the year, this offense is going to start clicking. This offense is going to start clicking. I felt at some point it was, and it's pretty evident that over the past 6 or 7 weeks that the offense is definitely clicking at this point. Aaron Rodgers getting the ball out quicker, more on time, just more accurate. He doesn't have those kind of missed throws that he was making so often earlier in the year, where you're just kind of left scratching your head, being like, "That's not the Aaron Rodgers that I knew from his MVP years." And if he had the weeks he's been having over the past 6 weeks, the whole season, he'd be the hands down MVP. He's been dominant, the highest graded quarterback in our grading over that time period. So I don't see any reason to think it's going to change against what the Lions send out on defense.
It's amazing to me how good this Green Bay offense can be. And we saw that a couple of years ago when they lost to Seattle in the NFC Championship game on just a bizarre manner, obviously, if you remember that game. It's amazing how good this team can be when Mike McCarthy goes with a running game and allows somebody to run the ball, whether it's Eddie Lacy or now, as Sam Monson so aptly has pointed out, they go with their only true running back they have, Ty Montgomery. When they give them the ball and they have some balance on that team, that offense is so good, isn't it, Sam?
Yeah, it really is. But I think Mike has nailed it in kind of focusing all the attention onto Aaron Rodgers, because he has been absolutely ridiculous since week 6. Week 6, I think he was the 29th graded quarterback in the NFL at PFF. He's down with like the Trevor Siemians of the league.
That's not good, by the way. Anybody who's keeping score at home, 29th is not good.
Definitely not good. And I think since that point, he's been the number one quarterback in the league in terms of PFF grading. He's been the only guy that can rival Tom Brady's play over the season, essentially. And over that span, he's hauled his way all the way up to 4th. And essentially, him, Andrew Luck, and Matt Ryan in 2, 3, 4 are all within like fractions of a PFF grading point from each other. But some of the differences in his play have been absolutely ridiculous. I mean, one of the things that he's been able to do in the past that not many quarterbacks are able to do is actually play better under pressure than when they're kept completely clean. He's had seasons in the past where his passer rating has actually improved when he's been put under pressure. And that's pretty ridiculous and almost unheard of. I mean, typically a quarterback's passer rating drops over 30 points when you put pressure on him, which is why sacks aren't the be all and end all of pass rush. If you can just get pressure on a quarterback, it makes him do bad things. It makes him be inaccurate. It makes him throw the ball to defenders and turn the ball over and all that kind of stuff. But with Rodgers at the moment, he's gone back to being better under pressure than he was or than he is when he's kept clean. And at the moment, his pass rating is actually going up by about 12 points when he's put under pressure. So I don't know how you defend him right now, because everyone is trying to keep him in the pocket, because if you let him out, he's lethal. He can either run, pick up big plays with his legs. He can start to run, move the defense around a bit, and then deliver one of those ridiculous 50-yard flick passes down the field to Jordy Nelson for a touchdown. So you don't want to let him outside the pocket. On the other hand, if you try and keep him in there, he's going to carve you up either way. He at the moment is pretty much unplayable, I think.
One thing that I wanted to touch on, and Mike, maybe you can talk about this, or Sam, your specialty is receivers as well. Jordy Nelson came off a pretty big injury. This guy is on the wrong side of 30. Early on in the season, he was scoring a lot of touchdowns, but didn't seem like he was getting a ton of separation. Over the last 6 weeks, and obviously a lot of that has to do with Aaron Rodgers' play, it seems like Jordy Nelson is also playing better, whether it's he has more confidence now on the field. Devontae Adams also has become, a little bit more reliable, although the last 2 weeks he has like 8 drops. Just ridiculous.
It's not tremendously reliable.
No. Actually, the antithesis of what reliable is. But for Aaron Rodgers, he does at least have, he has faith in him. And there have been weeks where Adams has barely been, Aaron Rodgers' target, I should say. Devontae Adams, that is. Randall Cobb has been, pretty much absent all year. And I remember early on in the season, we were kind of talking about, are any of the receivers even getting open? It does seem like the receivers are doing a better job for Rodgers as of late.
I think so. I think Jordy Nelson is really good at getting open when the play breaks down, so that even if he's not open on the first kind of intended route, as soon as Rodgers starts to move or extend the play in any way, shape, or form, he's one of those guys that's really good at snapping off his route, changing to something else, and breaking open in that regard. And I tweeted, I think, during the game this week that his career is going to end the same way that Deion Branches did, where he just hung on for 2-3 years based 100% on what he was able to do on the scramble drill. Like when the play broke down, he would be the guy that got open every single time and gave the quarterback somewhere to go with the ball. I think Nelson's the kind of guy that could do the same thing at the end of his career. Even when he can't get open at all anymore, he'll be the guy that gets 30 receptions and a few touchdowns for the last few years just because he understands how to get open and where to go when the play breaks down a little bit.
Let's talk about the other side of the ball, Mike, because, a few weeks ago, while, you guys were focusing on Aaron Rodgers a little bit, it was Green Bay's defense that had just fallen apart, whether it was injuries or for whatever reason. They were terrible. In fact, most people who were playing DFS were actually targeting, the Green Bay defense. We're like, wow, I'm just going to start receivers versus this defense. They're just terrible. They've played much better the last few weeks. Is this something they can sustain? And is this a team, can the Green Bay Packers defense, how do they match up against the Detroit Lions offense?
I don't think they match up terribly well, to be honest, just because the cornerback play has been so abysmal for them this year. We expected guys like Demarius Randall and Quentin Rollins, who had promising rookie seasons a year ago, to kind of take that next step forward and be, competent, NFL stars, guys you want to have. And so far to date, they've basically been liabilities instead of, competent stars. They've taken a step back from what we saw as rookies, especially Demarius Randall. I know he's dealt with some injuries, but every time he's out there, it seems like he's getting torched. So the fact that, they don't have enough cornerbacks at this point when they go nickel, when they go dime, to match up with all the Lions' weapons is definitely concerning. I could see this one going into a shootout, much like their last matchup was.
Sam, anything to add on that?
No, only that, it comes down to the fact that Detroit has to find a way to limit Aaron Rodgers in a way they weren't able to do the first time. And they weren't able to do it the first time in the middle of Rodgers' kind of relative slump. He wasn't playing particularly well when they last played. And I think they still put up 34 points, something like that. So the Lions need to somehow solve this riddle over the next couple of days and figure out a way of actually slowing him down.
Before we get into our playoffs and before we go into handicapping the playoff teams, I do want to get into what will be our last regular season Mike Crappy Bets. Mike?
Oh.
I know, you're sad.
Well.
We're all sad.
Well, it's coming to a sad end. I'll still pick the playoffs, but regular season, I didn't do too well. So fresh start come next week, but you have these 3 bets to hang your hats on here. I like, from the game we just talked about, I like the Packers -3. There's really 2 big matchups in this that really sway me to the Packers in this one. One is the fact that the Lions are getting pressure at the 3rd lowest rate in the NFL, despite blitzing at an above average rate. So their pass rush is not good, is basically what I'm saying. And they're going up against our number 1 rated pass blocking line, number 1 in pass blocking efficiency of the Green Bay Packers. They're just not going to be able to get much pressure on Aaron Rodgers. He's going to have all day. That bodes well for Green Bay. The other one is that the Lions just haven't been able to run the ball well of late, especially without, Theo Riddick in there. Packers, still a solid run defense. It's going to be all on Matt Stafford's shoulders. We saw how that kind of worked out for them last week, where he started pressing in the second half. So I just like the Packers in this one. Other matchups I like, the Ravens getting 1 point on the road to the Bengals. They're just the superior team here. The Bengals don't have Eifert. They don't have A.J. Green. I don't know who Andy Dalton's going to throw to in this one. I like the Ravens there. And then I like Denver giving a point at home to the Raiders. It's Matt McGloin, though. Matt McGloin going up against that secondary. They're probably better off just handing the ball off every time, and they might be able to win if they do that. But if they throw the ball up at all, I don't have confidence in the Raiders taking this one. So I'll go with Denver. Those 3 bets, lock them up. Stone cold locks, baby.
Stone cold locks. Well, I will say you have not. I don't think you've actually used that phrase yet this season. So maybe this week they will hold true.
I shouldn't use it ever again. Also,
week 17s are always difficult when it comes to betting, simply because you need to really try to understand which teams are still playing and which teams have packed it in. And I will say for Baltimore and Jim and Harbaugh, it is Jim, right? Or is it John?
John.
John.
I always forget. I'm like, whatever. It's one of the Harbaugh brothers. Anyway, they play hard. They're going to play through week 17, and I'm not convinced that Cincinnati is. So I don't hate that. A game that I actually do like, though, when teams aren't necessarily playing for anything, I never like giving a lot of points. And right now, Pittsburgh is giving 7 to Cleveland. We know Cleveland's not good, but hey, listen, RG3
is Landry Jones starting though, right? So
that's what I mean. And RG3, I believe he is is concussed. I don't think he's going to be playing this weekend. I think Cody Kessler's in there, which is actually a
He's
good
been
thing for
cleared.
Cleveland.
Yeah, I was gonna say. Yeah.
RG3 got cleared. Having said that, it was cleared by a third-party doctor, which sounds a little strange. But it sounds like he's at least declaring himself good to go. Whether the Browns will buy into that or not is another matter.
Well, we'll see. Either way, I just don't want to give 7 points when Antonio Brown's not going to play, Le'Veon Bell is not going to play, Ben's probably not going to play much at all if he plays. And to me, this just feels like, this could be like a 13-10 game. And I'm just not giving 7. When Pittsburgh just doesn't care at all. They're playing second teamers. Cleveland still wants to win this game. I know last week was their Super Bowl and they finally got off the snide, but I'll take the 7 points. And we'll go from there. Anyway, let's get into what will be our kind of playoff fun here. And let's go down the list here. So the New England Patriots are the prohibitive favorites to win this year. They are, I believe you can get maybe 5-2, maybe 3-1 if you go to certain places for them. Sam, give me a reason why they will succeed in the playoffs. This is pretty easy. This is
they're
low
the
hanging
best
fruit.
overall team in the NFL, and Tom Brady is playing as well as any quarterback in the NFL. That gives you a pretty good leg up in terms of winning playoff games and, a Super Bowl at the end of it all.
Mike, tell me why the Patriots will not succeed this year.
While they don't have a lot of holes, they're also not very dominant, especially defensively. They're not a team that if they I thought they didn't match up well with the Raiders because of that offensive line. I just don't think if they face a good offensive line, they're going to be able to get a lot of pressure on opposing quarterbacks. That doesn't bode well. But the thing is, there's not a lot of great offensive lines in the AFC left with, competent quarterbacks. So it might have to be to the Super Bowl until they face one like that.
Okay, let's move on here. Oakland Raiders, who, if they win, if they can beat Denver this week, they will be the 2 seed and get the bye. Sam, quickly, the Oakland Raiders. Why will they succeed? And I guess obviously all arrows are pointing at Matt McGloin. We don't have a lot of tape on this guy. Can this guy be successful?
Not really. I don't think so. I think the best they can hope for him is that he doesn't actively hurt their chances. If he can just be, we always talk about that game managing quarterback. If he can just go there, facilitate the playmakers they have in Crabtree and Amari Cooper and guys like that to actually continue making plays and just not turn the ball over. If he doesn't put the ball in harm's way, that's going to be the huge thing for any of these backup quarterbacks is if you can just avoid the catastrophic mistake. You don't need to make the huge play every time. You just can't give the ball to the opposition because that's going to be what hamstrings you. The other thing with Oakland is that defense is capable of big plays. We've said all year long that they're playing below the sum of their parts, but they don't even need to play to that level if that defense can generate turnovers, which again can come from one guy just taking over. Khalil Mack has done it in the past. The Carolina game, essentially, he won almost single-handedly with 2 ridiculous individual plays. He has the talent to do that. They've got a couple other guys in that defense that have the talent to do that. They just need to string together a couple of those games in a row where they win the turnover battle, both on offense and defense.
Before I move on, Mike, I just wanted to ask Sam this. Is there a way that the Oakland Raiders can take a page out of the Dallas Cowboys book? Now, I'm not saying Matt McGloin is Dak Prescott. That would be disrespectful to Dak Prescott in the amazing season that he has had this year. But, we talked about Oakland Raiders and their offensive line. They have 3 pretty talented running backs. With Khalil Mack, if Khalil Mack raises his game and, can make some plays on the defensive side of the ball, can Oakland rely on that offensive line and running game to keep these games close?
I think that should be their game plan, is to try and pound the ball on people, because that offensive line is one of the best in the league. It's especially good running the ball. There's some incredible power. When you look at the left side of Donald Penn and Kelechi Osemele, those guys can absolutely grind people into the dirt and off the line of scrimmage. And they don't need to have a Zeke Elliott behind them necessarily to have success. And, we're not expecting them to suddenly become the league's best rushing team. All they need to do is to be good enough so that it doesn't have to go down to Matt McGloin being a great quarterback. He just needs to be a guy that's part of that offense and can hand the ball off and rely on them actually getting some yards. So, yeah, I think it definitely makes sense for them to try and become more of a run-oriented offense.
I will say this about Matt McGloin and that offense. One, as a rookie 4 years ago, back in 2013, he wasn't god-awful. He wasn't good by any means, but it wasn't like he was just throwing the ball all over the place, had no business being in the NFL. He's only taken 58, snaps under. Only had 58 dropbacks since then. So you would expect him to get better, being in a similar, being in an offense for multiple years. Just having that experience under his belt, you expect him to be at least a little better than that. So he might come in and not be terrible, which is, that can win you some games sometimes if your defense plays well. And the other thing is they have two receivers that you don't necessarily need to have a great quarterback to get production out of. Michael Crabtree and Amari Cooper can make plays basically on their own with jump balls, screens, that sort of stuff, to where you can still scheme some offense where you're not really putting McGloin in dangerous situations where he could throw picks. You just get one-on-ones and you just loft it up to him, let him go get it. So I think that the Raiders, while they still have a chance, to winning some games, I don't think they're just going to be they're necessarily a one and done in the playoffs at this point. I still don't think they make the Super Bowl, though. That'd be crazy to me.
Yeah, obviously a disappointing end to the Oakland Raiders season if the Derek Carr injury is the reason they don't go very far. But, a promising future for them. Let's stay in that division, the Kansas City Chiefs. This is a team that took the New England Patriots to the brink last year before losing. They could have actually won that playoff matchup versus the Patriots last year. They did not, of course. Mike, tell us why the Chiefs can make the Super Bowl this year.
I think the Chiefs. Well, I've already told everyone because I wrote a whole article about why Alex Smith and whatnot are good enough to make Super Bowl. But the biggest thing to me, and what's most interesting, and what's kind of gotten, I don't want to say swept under the rug, but what's kind of been playing out over the last few weeks is the fact that Terrence Mitchell, the guy starting across from Marcus Peters now at cornerback, has been quietly pretty darn good when they really didn't have anyone that was playing well in that second cornerback role for them at that right cornerback. He's been pretty good, and they kind of just found him off of the scrap heap. A guy who bounced around for a few places from Chicago and Dallas over the past couple of years. He's played really well and really encouraging results. And if they get anyone across from him, if they have two cornerbacks playing well in man coverage, that defense is good enough to win a Super Bowl. And that, to me, is why I think that they still have a chance, even if the Derek Johnson injury is huge for them.
Sam, tell us what's going to hold them back.
Well, this is going back to the Mike Sam standoff on the Chiefs and Alex Smith. I don't think Alex Smith, unless you get the good Alex Smith, I don't think that they can win a Super Bowl. And so far, we've seen that guy, but it's only ever been for a game or two, and then you go back to being the Alex Smith that is not playing that well, and I don't think is one of the big reasons behind them winning games. So I think at some point in the playoff run, you're going to get one of those not good Alex Smith games, and that's going to be the one that causes you to be, 4 points short as opposed to 4 points on the good. So I think Alex Smith ultimately is going to cost them a Super Bowl this year.
Let's move on here. The Pittsburgh Steelers, no matter how they perform in the regular season, this is still a team that is just so dangerous on offense. And for a lot of fans out there, and analysts out there, they still think this is the team that might pose the biggest threat, especially now that Derek Carr is injured, to the Patriots. Sam, let's talk about the Steelers and why they could, get past the Patriots this year, or the Chiefs, or whoever they might get past and get to the Super Bowl.
Yeah, first thing I think is that defense is starting to play a little better. Certainly they've got a lot of young guys in that system, and earlier in the year they were all playing terribly. Artie Burns, the rookie first-round corner, looked in way over his head. Sean Davis they had in the slot, and he was just terrible there. But Davis has been moved to safety, and Artie Burns in the second half of the season has played a lot better. Certainly hasn't been victimized the way he was in the first half. So I think that's a big boost to that defense, where there aren't obvious places to pick big holes in or pick on the way there were. On offense, obviously, it's the same story as they've had for a while now. It's Roethlisberger, Le'Veon Bell, and Antonio Brown. And those three guys together are pretty lethal when you add in an offensive line that is actually pretty good and probably underrated at this point. I think everyone's kind of expected that line to be so good for a while that it's almost snuck up on everyone that it's actually become the line everyone was looking for. I mean, even Villanueva at left tackle has been playing pretty well recently. So yeah, that offense is suddenly a unit that looks every bit as scary as it was supposed to coming into this year. And that makes them a real force.
Mike, other side of it?
Why they would not win the Super Bowl?
Well, or why they won't succeed. I mean, I don't want to measure.
They won't succeed?
Yeah, I don't want to measure success just by winning a Super Bowl, because for some teams, that's not necessarily success. So, why won't they be a success in the playoffs?
Well, one, they just have no edge pressure to speak of whatsoever. So they just can't get pressure off the edge. Basically, all the pressure that they do get comes from the middle, or James Harrison coming, from a bull rush. So they really just struggle to get pressure on both sides of the quarterback. Against Tom Brady, against Alex Smith, that's where you need to be. You need to be in their face. You need to be getting sacks to alter games like that, and they just don't have the type of guys that can do that without a blitz. So that is concerning to me. And then the other thing that's concerning to me is that once you take away Antonio Brown, there really hasn't been anyone in that offense that I've seen consistently be able to step up and be a consistent threat. Eli Rogers had some good games. We've seen Ladarius Green have games at times, but I don't think that there's any receiver that I'd be too worried about if you're capable of taking away Antonio Brown. And especially with the way, Big Ben just hasn't been, the Big Ben that we're used to this season.
Just to play devil's advocate, through the years, I have heard that, the best way to pressure Tom Brady is not actually on the edge, but right in his face. That's the pressure he doesn't like, because he likes to step up in that pocket. So wouldn't that favor what the Steelers actually do well?
Well, they don't. It's not like they do that extremely well either. That's just
they just do it better. They just do it better. Okay, it's just not as sucky.
Yeah.
Let's go on, though. Miami Dolphins. Tannehill is out. Matt Moore is in. I don't know exactly how he's grading at PFF, Sam. Maybe you can let us know, but the stats look okay.
Yeah, I don't think he's kind of stood out one way or the other. I think he wasn't great this week, but he did step up towards the end and kind of lead them with some nice plays, albeit they then relied entirely on Jay Ajayi in overtime to get that done. And I think that's the key to their playoff push, is this team has basically gone as far as Jay Ajayi has been able to drag, carry, or force them over the course of the season. His rushing performance has been fantastic. He's averaging over 3 yards per carry after contact, I think, still. And breaking tackles at a ridiculous rate, 3.5 yards per carry after contact, which is ludicrous. I mean, that's a higher total yardage figure than guys like TJ Yeldon, Matt Asiata, Thomas Rawls, Todd Gurley, all those kind of guys. So basically, this offense, I think, is going to go as far as Ajayi can carry them.
And Mike, why won't the Miami Dolphins? Let's say, for them, really, just winning one playoff game would probably be deemed a success. Why won't they win a game?
Well, obviously, the Matt Moore factor is having a backup quarterback in there. But the other thing is just not having Mike Pouncey as well. If you look at Jay Ajayi's splits with Pouncey and without Pouncey there at center, they're pretty ridiculous. I know he had 200 yards against the Bills last week without him, but over the course of the season, he's averaging 5.9 yards per attempt with Pouncey, only 4.2 without him. That offensive line, relies on. They run a lot of plays where if the center's getting pushed back, they run a lot of outside zone plays. And if the center is basically in the running back's lap on those, it's going nowhere. They need to get that kind of push in the middle to let Ajayi create and do all the things he likes to do. So I think that, to me, is also a huge thing. They don't have the running lanes quite there without Mike Pouncey there in the middle.
Mike, I'm not going to waste our time with how the Houston Texans will fail, because I think that's what we all expect. But give me a reason why they surprise us and maybe win a game or two in the playoffs.
The only thing I can think of, and is Tom Savage turns out to be a good quarterback. Like, we don't know enough to say Tom Savage is bad. I mean, maybe you can say that it's not crazy to say that he's a bad quarterback at this point. But if he surprises everyone, puts on a Tom Brady type turnaround for them, that's the only thing I can think of for them having a chance of surprising us in the playoffs.
Houston can win a Super Bowl if Tom Savage turns out to be Tom Brady.
Exactly.
Fair enough.
Probably not going to happen here. Let's go to the NFC here. I am not going to waste our time with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers because the scenario for them to get in the playoffs. Sam, do you want to go through this? It's actually quite funny.
Anytime your scenario begins with and you need somebody to tie a game, it's probably not going to happen. So Tampa Bay clinches a playoff berth with a win and a Washington tie and a Green Bay loss. And them clinching the strength of victory tiebreaker over Green Bay, which requires Tennessee, Indianapolis, Dallas, and San Francisco all to win. So, I mean, it's possible. It's a mathematical possibility, but yeah, that's not happening.
Imagine seeing all of those happen if you're Tampa Bay. They get the tie, all those chips start to fall, and then Green Bay wins, and it crumbles in your face. That'd be pretty heartbreaking, but I'd like to see it.
By the way, one thing that's not listed there, but is also required, is my wife has to allow me to hire this fantastically beautiful 22-year-old nanny to help us out at home. She's Scandinavian, of course. That's also never going to happen. So good luck, Tampa Bay. Let's move on to teams that actually are going to be in the playoffs. The Seattle Seahawks. This is a team, obviously a huge injury a couple of weeks ago in Earl Thomas. Mike, tell us, how can they right the ship and make the Super Bowl run that, this is how this team is measured. This is not a team that's measured by making the playoffs anymore. They want Super Bowl runs.
Yeah, they still have as talented a defense as I think anyone in the NFC at this point. Maybe not the Giants, but they're right up there with them, even with the loss of Earl Thomas. And basically, they rely on Russell Wilson on offense. If he can carry them like he did at times this year, there was about 3 or 4 games where he just carried the offense all on his own, nothing to do with the O-line, not much to do with the running game. He carried them. And then sometimes it crumbles all in his face and he, throws 6 picks in a game or whatever it was. But they will need him to carry them 3-4 games, whatever it is, in the postseason this year if they have a chance of going back to the Super Bowl.
Sam, how big a loss is Tyler Lockett? I mean, this is a guy who a lot of people thought he would be a breakout player going into the season, was injured early on and didn't really emerge. But the last few weeks, he has been very dangerous. And if anybody saw that injury on the 1 yard line just this past week, it looked bad and it was bad.
Yeah, it's a pretty significant injury, obviously, for him, but it's a pretty significant loss for the offense as well. This has always been a team that doesn't really have that number one go-to receiver, but rather a bunch of guys that can get open and make plays, whether it's Doug Baldwin, Tyler Lockett. Obviously, Jimmy Graham is slightly different in that he's a kind of difference maker from the tight end position. But then guys like Jermaine Kearse and Paul Richardson, it's just not a team of stars. And when you take one of those guys out that can consistently get open, you're just bumping everybody from the depth chart up one spot. And it's kind of diminishing everything all the way down the depth chart and down the kind of target list. So, yeah, it's a pretty significant loss. Their biggest issue, though, has been the issue right the way from on paper heading into the season. It's the offensive line is just abysmal. And it really hasn't been anything other than that all the way through the season. And like Mike says, sometimes Russell Wilson has been able to get by despite that offensive line. And then sometimes it's just so bad that he can't do it. And I think their biggest problem might not be what it's doing to Russell Wilson, but what it does to Thomas Rawls in the running game. And like if you look last week against Arizona, I mean, they put up a bunch of points because Russell Wilson was playing out of his skin, but Thomas Rawls had 8 carries for 8 yards, and he gained 9 yards after contact. So the offensive line quite literally gave him absolutely no help whatsoever. And at some point, that's going to catch up to them. I mean, it's already caught up to them a few times during the regular season. At some point in the playoffs, it's probably going to be one of those games where it's just too much for them to overcome.
Just for the record, I didn't go to MIT, and I don't think you need to go to MIT to do the math there and realize that if you gain 9 yards after contact, but only 8 yards in the game, that's not generally a good thing.
Well, no, it means the offensive line didn't give you a huge amount of open real estate to run into.
All right. Let's move on to the Atlanta Falcons. This is a team that for much of the season has kind of been overlooked, but I think a lot of people are looking their way now. They certainly have an explosive offense. Matt Ryan just 1-4 in the playoffs, though, in his career. Mike, tell us why this year is different than in the past.
Well, one, because I think Matt Ryan actually looks different. He's actually grading out a lot differently than he has in the past. And I think he's, as I said earlier this week, I think he's the MVP of the NFL. He's playing fantastically. And the job that, Kyle Shanahan's done this season can't be overlooked because schematically they're just exploiting basically every defense they go up against. And I think another big thing that shouldn't be overlooked here is if they win, they'll have, if they win this weekend, they'll have a bye, home field first game. And then in all likelihood, even if Dallas does win, they'll be playing in a dome the next week if they also, win. So playing in a dome, I think, is big for Matt Ryan just with his arm strength and whatnot. I think playing indoors with that offense is a huge advantage for them. And I think that plays to their strengths as well. So I think that they do have a chance of getting by in the NFC just on the backs of the way Matt Ryan's been playing this year.
Sam, what holds him back?
The other side of the ball. As good as the offense is, the defense isn't great. And, that offense has been able to put up huge amounts of points. They've had games that have been way closer than they should have been this year because they haven't been able to stop teams scoring. And that was before they lost Desmond Trufant. They're the best player in their secondary. I don't think it's a terrible defense. It's okay, but it's definitely got some weaknesses and some places you can exploit them. And for all the ridiculous pass rush and the sack totals of Vic Beasley has had, they really don't have that much else around other than him. And he is still significantly less productive, I think, than the sack number suggests. When you look at just the sheer total of pressures he's got, it's a lot less than a lot of other players have generated that have fewer sacks than him. So Vic Beasley may be able to generate some pressure, but if you take him away, or even if you can live with his pressure, there's not a huge amount of extra heat coming from anywhere else. So I just think the defense is the biggest problem they have that they need to overcome. Every game they have to win has to be a shootout, essentially.
And for those of you at home who are new to Pro Football Focus or new to our podcast and, don't quite understand sometimes when PFF says, the sacks don't necessarily tell the whole story. It's the same with touchdowns, and it's a lot with life. If you are a baseball fan, a baseball player can hit the ball hard, but it can go right at a position player and he can be out. Now, the baseball player who hit the ball didn't do anything wrong, so sometimes you can't always judge a particular play by the result. If a quarterback throws a ball to a wide open receiver in the end zone and the receiver drops it, it's not on the quarterback that he didn't get the touchdown. And the same reason, obviously, if he caught the touchdown. So sometimes we have to look past the result. And sacks, for the same reason, it's one of the reasons I was drawn to PFF many years ago. It's one of the reasons I'm still a huge believer in what these guys do. You have to look past just the stats, and this is what these guys do on an everyday basis. Let's continue on.
One of the best examples of that was that AFC Championship game last year. Tom Brady only sacked 4 times, but it was probably the most dominant, defensive line performance I've ever seen. He was under pressure, I think, well over 50% of his snaps in that game. Just every throw, it seemed like, was affected by pressure, even though only 4 times they got him to the ground.
Well, or even if you look at the Giants against the Eagles this past week, Eli Manning wasn't sacked at all in the game. The Eagles didn't get to him once, but they put him under pressure 21 times. And on those 21 snaps, Eli Manning's passer rating was 10.7, and he threw 2 interceptions. So at no point in the game did they get him to the ground, but that entire game was essentially defined by the pressure they put on Eli Manning.
Yeah, there's analogies everywhere. I mean, if we play golf and you hit a perfect 9-iron, and it just skips off the green or just hits the back of it, and you're like, I hit the ball so well, though. It just sometimes things like that happen. Anyway, let's move on to the NFC North. By the way, if you're wondering why we're not going into matchups, Week 17 is essentially meaningless. We went over the one game, obviously. We will cover playoff matchups next week. The Green Bay Packers, we kind of talked about them already. But very quickly, Mike, I think we know how they will succeed. What will hold them back?
It's the defense again. Their run defense has been, I think, good enough, better than it has in past years, but it's still not amazing. And then just the secondary. They have 2 good safeties. HaHa Clinton-Dix and Morgan Burnett have been fantastic this year. They do a good job of putting cap on the back end of the defense for the most part. But those cornerbacks are just are just a liability. They don't have one single guy where you can, kind of hang your hat on, say, I'm comfortable with him matching up against the other team's number one receiver. I'm comfortable with him, leaving him on an island, whatnot. And when you don't have that guy, you're kind of left scrambling. And we've kind of seen it over the past, just, even that stretch in the middle of the season, they just get torched at times when they go up against talented offenses. So if they go up against someone like Dallas or someone like Atlanta, the chances of them holding, chances of the Packers holding them under 30 points just seems pretty low at this point.
Good news is that the way Aaron Rodgers is playing, there's a good chance they could still win the game 33-30.
That's what they'll need.
Sam, let's go to Detroit. The Detroit Lions, interestingly enough, have the second worst point differential of the teams that could make the playoffs. The Houston Texans are by far the worst at -42. The Detroit Lions are at -5. What can the Detroit Lions do to make a run this year?
I'm going to get the hate again, but
that's why I asked you.
Like,
they can't.
This Lions team can't win a Super Bowl. It just isn't that good. Like,
can they win a game?
If they were going to win a Super Bowl, it would require Matthew Stafford upping his game again. It would require all their best playmakers playing to the very peak of their ability. Marvin Jones, Golden Tate, Theo Riddick coming back. It would require everything, and that still wouldn't solve the problem of the defense. Where
what about Mike's
guys?
What about Mike's long lost cousin Zach?
Zach.
Yeah, I mean,
he looked like Mike Allstott.
Yeah, briefly against in 1 week. I don't think that this team has been as good as their record all the way through the season. They've won a lot of very close games, which I think is probably unlikely to repeat itself in the playoffs where you're going up against the very best teams in the league. If they beat Green Bay this week with both teams actually trying to win the game, then maybe I'll reassess things. But I don't think that happens, at which point I'm not even sure Green Bay are the best team in the NFC they'll have to face. So I can't see how it can happen.
My thing is, we get a lot of hate for obviously hating on the Lions, but when you just look at the roster from top to bottom, there's not really any places where you can say, oh, this is where they're much better than they were a year ago. Maybe offensive line. I'll give you Taylor Decker as an upgrade at left tackle, and Travis Swanson's definitely been better at center. But there's outside of that, they lost Calvin Johnson. Ziggy Ansah hasn't been nearly as productive on the edge. There's just not areas on this team where they're actually physically better than they were a year ago. They just kind of, won all the close games instead of losing all the close games like they did last year.
More importantly, there might not be that many places on the roster where you can look at it and say, this is where they're much better than any other team they're going to go up against. It's not even as if you can point to obvious matchup advantages and say, if the game ends up somehow entirely down to this matchup, they've got a chance. They're just nowhere do they look better than the potential opposition they're going to have to run through if they want to win a Super Bowl.
I
don't think any Lions fans listen to this podcast anymore, though. So
not anymore, no.
No, we've alienated. Hey, by the way,
the last of them gone.
Tweet us. You know what? Tweet us at PFF_Mike, at PFF_Sam, or Tuck on Sports. Let us know if you're a Detroit Lions fan, and let us know why we're wrong. One thing that I always find interesting about Matt Stafford and the Detroit Lions, it almost seems like they alternate who is the go-to offensive weapon. Whether, early on in the season, Marvin Jones looked like a top 5 player. Then Golden Tate came out of nowhere after being terrible the first 5 or 6 weeks to be the guy. Last week, Eric Ebron catches 7 or 8 balls for 95 yards. I mean, if they could ever get them all on the same page where they're all playing well with Stafford, maybe this offense could be exciting. Obviously, lack of a running game does affect them. I will say the Detroit Lions have overachieved this year. Their over-under win total for the season, according to Vegas, before the season started, was just 7.5. So Vegas did not think they would make the playoffs, and they have obviously a chance to make the playoffs. We'll see how it plays out. Let's go to the Washington Redskins. We'll cover this team because if they beat the New York Giants, and the game is meaningless for the New York Giants, they will make the playoffs in all likelihood.
Unless,
of course, the Lions and the Packers tie.
There you go.
Which is probably not going to happen. So let's go into these Redskins here. Sam?
Well, like Mike says, this is the best offense in football if you ignore the quarterback and the was it quarterback and running back?
Yes.
So other than
Best
that,
offense.
it's the best offense in the game right here.
Don't you have to ignore the offensive line too then?
No, they got a good offensive line.
No, yeah, he's with the offensive line's good. The receivers are good, and that's it. But Kirk Cousins has actually been playing okay. You know, he's been playing much better in the second half of the season than he was in the first half of the season. And I think, as funny as that line was, I think he has a point. I think this offense is actually a pretty good unit and capable of carrying the team to a degree and putting up some decent points. You know, they absolutely torched a pretty bad Chicago team last week. They, they've racked up points against the Eagles, which have a pretty good defense. They put up some kind of points against Dallas and Arizona. I think this is a team that can score. Their question again comes down to what can they do on defense, because they've got some pieces. It's not a complete package there. You know, you've Josh Norman hasn't played nearly as well as he did last year. Everybody around Josh Norman isn't playing as well as he had in Carolina last year. They're a team that's actually capable of getting some pressure, and there's some pieces up front, but it's not a complete front seven. So it's one of those teams where it kind of depends how the defense plays on any given day.
Mike, I mean, you talked about defense here. Obviously, Sam talks about the defense. You know, is this Redskins team, are they capable of going on, you know, a 2011 New York Giants type run, or, you know, that Flacco Baltimore Ravens type run? Is this the kind of team that can do that?
Man, I don't want to say no, because you know, stranger things have definitely happened. We've seen Kirk Cousins put together streaks of games, but at the same time, the secondary is an issue. The front seven isn't anything special. It's just there's not a lot of talent, you know, top tier talent in that defense to where, you know, all of a sudden a playmaker could take over a game and win you a couple. So I just think they're going to get exposed defensively by someone, especially when you consider all the offenses that are in the NFC that are likely to be in the NFC playoffs at this point. I just think they're in trouble.
I think the injury to Jordan Reed can't be overstated. He's just such a mismatch for a lot of defenses out there, and such a valuable weapon to pair along with those other receivers in Washington. And while he'll play, I just don't think he is going to be 100% until next season. I've separated my shoulder far, not nearly as bad as he has, and people look
You're
at me.
Still not the same guy,
and I'm still not the same guy. And actually, and people know that I am a Goliath. Anyway, let's go to the New York Giants. I mean, obviously, we know this team's going to go with Eli Manning, right, Sam?
I don't think so, because weirdly, he's been the single biggest drag on their season so far. They've actually been, if you look at everything else, they've really deserved to be, I think, a better team than they're showing, because Eli Manning is playing so badly. So I think they can actually win games even with Eli Manning not improving and him playing bad football. I think that's how good this team can be overall, especially the defense. But obviously, if he does decide to rediscover playoff Eli Manning form and actually starts to play well, they suddenly vault into being one of the favorites as opposed to just a contender. This defense is really good up front. You've got Damon Harrison. I tweeted a stat today that he has 10 more run stops than any other defensive tackle, and he's played like 73 fewer snaps than the guy in second place, which is Danny Shelton. So he has been an absolute monster against the run. They've been able to get pressure with Olivier Vernon, even if the sacks haven't been as much as people would want them, to be. They've got some pass rush there, and then even if they didn't, that secondary is so good that they can kind of live with a lower amount of pass rush pressure than a lot of other teams. You've got 3-4 guys deep at corner. You've got maybe the best safety pairing in the NFL this season in two guys that nobody would have thought would fit that billing coming into the season. Landon Collins closer to the box has been amazing, and Andrew Adams coming in as the sort of free safety partner there has been fantastic. So this defense can carry them through games, and then if they get anything beyond crappy play from Eli Manning, they're absolutely lethal.
They kind of remind me, not a whole lot, but in some ways, of the Broncos a season ago, because just what they have defensively in that they don't even worry about stopping the run. They can stop the run basically in their sleep with that front four. And then all they do is basically worry about their coverage that they're going to play. They worry about how they're going to stop the opposing pass defense, which helps a lot just in terms of schematically what you can do what you have to worry about. So I think that's their biggest strength. But then, like we've said already, Eli Manning, if he doesn't, get back to old Eli, I still don't think they really have a good chance of making it through the NFC.
I mean, Odell Beckham, I'm not a New York Giants fan, but if you are not an Odell Beckham fan, at least watching that man play football, you just don't love football. I mean, that last game last week, what he was doing on the field, it was almost it just seemed like a man playing in a high school game. It was amazing what this guy could do. Almost reminiscent. I wonder if he could do what Larry Fitzgerald did to the Arizona Cardinals a few years back when he just went on fire in the playoffs. I mean, can the New York Giants offense and can Eli Manning in that running game and Odell Beckham, can they do just enough? I mean, we've seen them beat the Cowboys twice already this year. So could it be a situation where if they get the right matchups in the playoffs, they can do well?
I think the issue is that it's not a sort of, you don't need him to hit a baseline. You don't need them to just be a game managing guy. With Eli Manning, you need him to avoid making ridiculous turnovers. You need him to avoid throwing horrendous interceptions or interceptable passes. There was a game, a couple of weeks ago, I think, where he threw one pick, should have had four, had like 3 dropped interceptions. This week he had 3 interceptions. You can't win close games when you are just digging yourself a colossal hole in terms of the turnover margin. So if they want to win games, Eli doesn't have to sort of raise his level to being just good enough. He'll have some production. He just needs to stop giving the ball to the opposition.
I think the Giants' best chance of kind of skirting through the NFC is if they avoid basically the Packers and the Falcons, because I think the Giants can score about 17 points against anyone. I think that's about what they're going to score against anyone. It's can they stop the other team from scoring 17 points at that point? And I just don't think they want to face 2 of the better offenses in the NFL this year.
Let's move on to the Dallas Cowboys. 13-2 is their record. They have home field advantage throughout. Mike, tell me what holds them back.
There's not a lot holding them back, to be honest. It's basically, are you going to get bad Dak Prescott at one point, which is scary. The fact that he's had 2 games that are just, far beyond bad at this point. But I not a lot of reasons to worry. If you are a Cowboys fan at this point, you should be favored against basically any team you play in the NFC. The only thing that has somewhat been an issue this year is their pressure rate, second lowest pressure rate in the NFL, but it's been climbing of late. David Irving's been a huge find on that defensive line. And if Randy Gregory in the playoffs takes a step forward from the Randy Gregory we saw as a rookie, who was pretty good then, they'll start to get more pressure on quarterbacks. And there really aren't too many holes or glaring weaknesses that you can exploit with this Cowboys team at that point.
Yeah, they're an interesting team because they're good on both sides of the ball. So you can turn Dak Prescott into bad Dak, but only if you have a really good defense. So the Giants have done it twice. The Eagles did it to him once. The Vikings were able to limit that offense pretty severely compared to what everyone else has managed to do. But most of those teams don't have the corresponding offense that's good enough to be able to make use of that, to be able to put up huge amounts of points on this Dallas defense. They've been able to keep it into a close, low-scoring game as opposed to a close, high-scoring game, which is what some of their other games have been. So I think there's a good chance that we might find a team in the playoffs that will be able to turn Dak into bad Dak. It might not matter. They might not be good enough to take advantage of that. On the other hand, you'll face if they face the Packers again or another team like that, there might be a team that can live with them, go toe-to-toe with them in a shootout, but it'll be a shootout because they won't be able to slow down that Dallas offense. So they're a team that I think is just really tough to beat because they're good at both things. It's very, and there aren't that many well-rounded teams in the NFL. going into these playoffs. There's a bunch of teams that are very good on one side of the ball and not the other.
I think most of us will probably admit that the best coach in the AFC is Bill Belichick, and I don't think you'll get many arguments in the NFC. Mike, who's the best coach?
Best coach in the NFC. Why would you
close
do this to
games?
me?
Well, I'm just saying. I mean, close games are often decided by a coach. I mean, an in-game adjustment, whether it be some sort of a move they make, whatever it is. Who's going to win that chess match? Who's the best coach?
Since Jeff Fisher was fired a few weeks ago,
I know,
I'll
it's
probably
tough.
have to go. I'll have to go with Pete Carroll. I just the results we've seen from Pete Carroll in Seattle, what he does defensively. I think earned the right to be called the best coach in the NFC at this point.
Sam, we'll get into firm predictions next week on a game-by-game basis, but right now, who's going to make the Super Bowl in the AFC?
In the AFC, as much as I want to, I can't really look beyond the Patriots. I think the Raiders would have been a really interesting team if they had Derek Carr, but without him, I just can't see that happening.
Mike, NFC?
NFC, that was so tough. It's pretty wide open. I'm gonna say the Atlanta Falcons.
Atlanta Falcons. Okay, so we're not going with the favorites. Sam, what do you think of the NFC?
Yeah, the way that Aaron Rodgers is playing, I think Green Bay can do it. I don't know that anyone can defend him right now.
And Mike, what about you think in the AFC?
I'll stick with. I picked the Patriots to win it all at the beginning of the season. Really, no reason to go against it at this point. They're good.
That's great. Good. Okay, so Mike has got the Patriots and the Atlanta Falcons, and you think the Patriots are going to win it all. And Sam has the Patriots and the Green Bay Packers. And who do you have winning it all, Sam?
Yeah, I'm going to have to stick with the Patriots as well. They're the best team in the NFL at this point, and they have a quarterback playing as well as anybody. So that usually does it.
I am going to go. I've got a little bit of a long shot here, but we'll see. I'm going to go with the Kansas City Chiefs. They just win. I think Alex Smith has some moxie. I'm going with the Kansas City Chiefs to upset the New England Patriots and make the Super Bowl. And I'm going to go with the favorites in the NFC. I think the Cowboys get there, and I think the Cowboys win the Super Bowl.
Ooh.
I'm going to go with I'll go with chalk. It's no big deal.
Belief.
That's it.
Right.
That's going to do it for us, guys. We will be back next week. Week 17. It was created for sports bettors, okay? The week is meaningless. So go out there, find a friend, bet a couple of dollars on each game, make the week a little bit more fun. That's right. We are encouraging degenerates.
Don't use my picks if you are going to actually put a lot of money.
Of course, you can tweet us at PFF_Mike, at PFF_Sam. I'm at Tuck on Sports. Thanks, guys. Enjoy the week. We'll see you in 2017. Happy New Year from us and everybody at Pro Football Focus. Goodbye.
Take it easy.